metallic inks and toners can vary depending on the machine that you're printing. For example, an offset printed press has a very certain size of metallic flake in the ink. It's known as a micron size, and it varies between about 7 and 12 microns. Now on a digital device, we also have a certain effect. So this is a specialty color chart from the Fujifilm Revoria PCE 1120 press, and it has a silver and a gold. So we can see there the two specialty metallic inks. Now, to most people, they kind of look a little bit flat. You can see there's not really anything to it. But let's just zoom right in. You can see what's happening. So you can see on the silver there, we've got this kind of like pixely kind of effect. And that is because you have metallic pigment in the ink or toner. So we can replicate that with the Visualis3R software. And it's also very important when you're printing CMYK inks over this, what the color looks like. So for the purpose of this demonstration, what we're going to do is take this page out of the Fujifilm Revoria tint chart. And as we can see here, this is a metallic silver. What they're doing is creating an XY color chart using tint percentages of 0 to 80 on the yellow, 0 to 80 on the cyan, and 80% silver. And that creates these colors. And as you can see here, it's got a slight kind of almost like a glittery effect. And you can see how the colors work. So bearing in mind this color in the bottom corner here, that is 80% yellow printed over silver. And as you can see, you don't get 80% yellow. It's kind of a weakened kind of color. It's slightly grayish. And you do have that sparkle effect there. You can see it working there with the light shining on it. And up in the top corner up here, this one is 80% silver with 80% cyan. And as you can see there, when you reflect it in the light, you get a different effect working, and obviously all the different tints in between. So the whole point of this is, first of all, to say that what you see on the screen doesn't match what you're going to get printed. And that's a hard part for a designer to understand, is if you're designing with a color palette and it doesn't look the same on the screen as it does on the print, that is a bit misleading. And that's nothing to do with anybody's technology. It's the way that color libraries work. You can't actually mimic the true color of a metallic. And as you can see here, you can change the angle of observation, and your metallic changes from a highly shiny to the darker. So when there's no light shining on it, it's flat and you see more of the color. When the metallic pigment starts to work, it sparkles and gives you that glossy effect. But again, you've got that real kind of almost like a glittery kind of effect. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take this file. I'm going to mock up that sheet there with all the tints, and we'll bring it into the Visualis3R software. Okay, so I've rebuilt the tint chart in Illustrator. So we have 80% cyan in the top left-hand corner, we have 80% yellow in the bottom right-hand corner, we have 80% yellow, 80% cyan in this bottom left, and then obviously 5% of each in the top. So, but what that does is it creates like an XY color chart. Let's turn off the silver. You can see the tints scaled between the cyan and the yellow, and if we turn off the CMYK, you will see the silver. Now the silver in here is set to 80%. I'm not sure the logic behind what Fujifilm has chosen to do with this. They obviously have a reason on their side. It could well be that some of the machines have a total ink limit. So for example, a digital engine might have a total ink limit of 240, in which case if you have 80 cyan, 80 yellow and 80 silver, that's 240 total ink limit. So that might be what they're doing. So they might be thinking reduce the silver down to 80 to give a little bit extra color to the cyan and the yellow. The other option is that you don't always print 100% silver density on the press. So part of what we do with our system, and also with companies like ColorLogic, so I'm the co-founder of ColorLogic and the developer of that system. It's a metallic communication system developed for metallic inks and also for white ink on metallic substrates. And what we educate at ColorLogic is that basically on the press, you don't run your silver at 100%, you drop it down to about 70%. That's a sweet spot between finding the optimum metallic effect, reflectivity, combined with the fusing of the color over the top to give you the optimum color range. And you can do this as a test yourself on your own press if you're not familiar with this. Take a 100% cyan, print it over the top of 100% silver using 100% density on the press, and then print the same color out again, but bring your silver down to 70%, and you will see a clear difference between better color and fusing with the silver, but still retain the metallic effect. But let's move on. So we have this effect. As you can see here, these are the colors that Illustrator says it looks like. And the problem is that Illustrator and Photoshop and InDesign cannot show you the color correctly because it cannot show you the physical characteristics, that's the physics of metallic inks, ink trapping, pigments, reflectivity. So for example, on the right hand side here, I've taken a photograph, albeit with my phone, so it's not exactly the best photo reproduction. For example, I'm in a slightly dimly lit room, so there's a lot of shadow in here. So it's not, I mean, if I look at the sample in my hand, it's nowhere near as dark as this. You know, these blues look really kind of like magenta-y and over-coloured. And you can tell that from this silver patch here. That silver's looking magenta and it shouldn't look magenta. So if it's looking magenta here, that's what's adding this darkness and greyness to the overall photograph. And if you look at the paper, that paper's slightly creamish. It's nothing, certainly not white. But I didn't want to edit this photo. I just wanted to snap it just to prove, first of all, you can't measure metallics. You cannot photograph them accurately. They change based on the angle of observation. For example, if you have three people, one stood on the left-hand side, one stood in the middle, and one stood on the right-hand side of this chart, they all see the colour differently and perceive it differently based on their angle of observation, because metallic reflectivity changes light scattering. So this is really important when you're working with graphic design, is that you can't go on the basis of that, because that isn't real. And this is only as real as you can do as a photograph. So you've got to have a physical guide in your hand. If you print this chart off and you move it, you will see the same thing. The colour will change. It will go brighter and darker and more saturated and greyer and lighter and shinier, depending on how you hold and move the print. So there's never really a system out there that can mimic that 100%. Not even the best software out there cannot mimic true to life effects. And the reason being is also because of environment. So when you look at rendering engines, including Visualis3R, it has a pre-designed room environment in there. Now my room that I'm in is heavily wooded. So I've got a lot of dark wood tabletops and furniture. And this comes out in the reflectivity, which is more than likely what's causing this kind of like brownish kind of magenta-y tint to the actual silver, because it's picking up color environment in your room. So I've got like large screen black TV on the wall, black framed wooded desks. I've got all that sort of stuff. And then on the other side, I've got bright white walls. So I can move this around in different parts of my office and get different effects. So what I'm showing you on the screen here is just to say what it kind of looks like, but even this photograph is wrong. So when I'm doing my measurements in Visualis3R to try and match as best as possible, we won't be able to get the same color because, first of all, the silver is the wrong color. Now, speaking of the color for silver, two things. First of all, you cannot measure metallics accurately. Now, though people will argue against this and they'll say, oh, you can take a multi-angle device and you can measure every angle. It's like, well, yes, but which is the right one? And it comes back to that observation angle. What angle are you looking from? Which is the right angle? If you take, 180 degree from a flat angle all the way over like a dome, and you measure every single angle, which observation point is right? And are you saying if this one's right from here, then is everything else wrong? So anyway, in this one here, I'm using the NYX Mini 3 color sensor. It's actually pretty damn good. I'm actually pretty impressed with it. So it's got an observer 2 degrees M2 with the illuminant of D50. So if you don't know what all that means, go and have a look on the internet. Great source for finding information out. All we're bothered about is clicking on the colour and getting as best as we can. So it's an LED based system. It measures the colour, and as far as I'm actually pretty happy with what it does. It's never going to be right for colour 100%, but it's pretty damn good. So I'm going to use that as the measurements for my silver in the Visualis3R software. So when you measure it with the NYX Mini 3, they're about $100. So brilliant for measuring like, the colour of your paper, spot colours, and we will be making other tutorials on the NYX Mini 3. So do take a look out at that again inside the Academy. But for now, all we're interested in is either the RGB or the hex number, so we can put either of those two into the Visualis3R software and set up the silver as close to that colour, or basically that colour in the system. Now moving on from that, the last little thing I want to show you is a zoomed in close-up, and this is just to prove a point. Again, look at that colour here on this photograph compared to this one. Same phone, different angle, two different colours, completely changes. But the importance of this is to highlight how metallics work. So, maybe not to most people, but can you notice that slight magenta tint to it? So up here we've got slight magenta warmth in the top part here, And that is important because all those colours that come from the materials, from the reflections in the room, affect your colour that you put over the top, how you perceive it, how you see it. So trying to photograph it is an absolute nightmare, but I'm trying to do the education point here and to show you that inside the ink itself you have little metallic particles. Imagine little tiny shards of silver. Is the easiest way to explain it. And they're normally a certain micron size, let's say 7 to 12 microns, which is like you get on an offset machine. They can't go any smaller in size, really, because the smaller it is, the smaller the surface area, and you get less surface reflection. So you've got to have a certain coarseness to that pigment. And you see that in the print. So over here, we can just see it in this photograph, and in the video that I showed you before, you can clearly see that kind of almost glittery effect. Now, those particles will do something called orientation. So they'll orientate themselves by what's typically known as leafing. So a leafing property means it goes basically, it's almost like floating up to the surface of a layer, and it sits on the top and it orientates itself to the best ability of how it's being developed to reflect light and scatter light. And when it does that, it also creates little tiny dips behind it of shadow. So you can see it here. You've got little bits of shadow, little bits poking in. So when you move it at a certain angle, it becomes very bright, very reflective. That silvery pigment really takes over with the lighting and it goes very bright and shiny, and you don't notice all these little dimply bits. But when it's slightly out of the light, those little bits of shadows, dimpling, it can be surface texture, it can be a whole range of things, create that little sparkly effect. And that's what makes silvers sparkle. It's not just a flat color. So you can see here, like I said, in this area here, if we start to zoom in, you'll see, obviously badly taken with my camera, but you can see that kind of glittery, it's not flat, it's not uniform, it has a different type of edge to it. So, just to quickly recap, what you see in Illustrator is wrong. It's no fault of Illustrator or anybody that makes palettes, it's just that it cannot simulate the trapping characteristics, and that is how the colour fuses. So what we're going to do now is we're going to jump over to the Visualis3R software. Now I have just already put this one in, let me just start this one again. As you can see it from scratch, I was doing a tutorial with somebody else earlier. And let's just start again from scratch. So we're going to go to the Fujifilm swatches, we're going to import that PDF file. Let's just reset that orientation wise. Okay, so just like we see in Illustrator, solid saturated colors over a metallic base. And you can see metallics and it's like, most people are like, oh, that's nice, but it's not really the way it works. As we've seen in that photograph, you've got differences in how the ink traps. So first of all, we need to set up the color of the ink. So let's see, what did we say that hex color was? I'm going to use the hex color for this one. So is it, zoom in, my computer will catch up. B2, B6, B5. So B2, B6, B5. So I've now added in the colour that I measured from my silver. So that's the first thing. Let's just turn off all the colour layers apart from the silver so we can see what that looks like. So now we have this silver in here. Now silver on its own is highly reflective. As soon as you put another colour over the top and you start laying like cyan and magenta and yellow and black over the top of it, the metallic effect diffuses down because you've now got ink layers over the top. So when light shines through, what normally happens is light shines through, it hits the white paper. The white paper is the illuminant, which bounces the light back through the colour, is what makes you see colour. Now with metallic inks, it works the same way, but the light comes through, it hits the metallic effect and bounces back to the metallic. Now if you have one layer of colour, let's just say you have cyan on its own, over the top of the silver, you get a better metallic effect than you do with the greens, which has got two inks over it. And this is where ink calculation limits are important. So what Fujifilm's done here, and kind of quite rightly so, is they're trying to limit how much colour goes over to get the best looking metallic effect. Now, you'll see down here in the yellow, it becomes very reflective based on that only having a yellow ink. Now, yellow is a very translucent ink compared to a cyan. So the more density or the more pigment in the ink also affects the effect. So down here, you'll see that this color has a certain reflectivity. Again, like I said, it's not right for color because we're seeing pure color printing over the top of silver, and that's not the way it works on a machine. So as we showed in that photograph, you've got that, that kind of dullness, grayness, but also You've also got that like glittery effect. I keep forgetting that word. Okay, so let's just take a look at the silver for now. So what does this do, all these different sliders? Well, do take a look at our video tutorials that go more in depth about everything, but we can change the opacity. So maybe if you're printing, like we say, we normally recommend using 100% silver on your artwork file and controlling it at the press. So we could then go in and say, okay, we're dropping it down to 80% on the press. We do it that way. So two different ways of working. So we'll leave it at 100%, which means that this tint patch stays at 80% because we set that up in the artwork file. Texture strength. So this is what most people do. Other rendering software that's out there that might be able to handle metallics would put this surface texture in. But that's actually a bit false because it's not the way it works. Surface texture like that is more likely coming from the material. So that surface texture as a base material to simulate paper fibers is fine, but you don't get it on the white paper. So this is actually technically wrong. You know, we wouldn't put it in normally, but I'm just going to leave it in for now just to show you what it does. Now the metalness is the grayness from the material combined with the environment, so we can control it. Now you don't get much leeway between the two. There's only like between 0 and 30 points on this one because metallics have a certain bandwidth of reflectivity. They're not overly shiny, they're not dull, they're not flat, they've got a certain tolerance. Now we could also do reflectivity, so you can see I've just whacked up the reflectivity a bit. This would be more mimicking like a VMP pigment, so this is not applicable to the Fuji Revoria device, but if you're working on, say, you know, a flexo machine or a UV offset, they have metallic silvers called VMP pigment. So it's a vacuum metallized particles that basically have highly reflective pigments in them that give really glossy effects to them. So we could, if we wanted to do that, but obviously we're not going to do it in here. We also then have flake size. So the flake size is what we're going to put in now. So let's go in for around about 7 and let's put in the intensity in a moment. But before we do that, let's just switch all the color layers back on. So I'm going to put in the intensity now. So you should be able to now see up at the top here, we have that metallic flake. Now I'm just going to go up a little bit more so you can really see it on the screen just for the purpose of this. We can up that. It's not going to be that intense. It's probably going to be somewhere around the 20 mark. So we could set that up. We can also nudge these up if we want to be accurate. Let's go with an 8. So in that case, we've now got metallic particles in the effect. So you can see here, true to life, metallic flake, acting in the same way, you know, that darkening effect that you get that you saw on that image that I took. So we've now got a more realistic metallic effect, but the color is still overly saturated. And this is where the next section comes in, ink trapping. So ink trapping is basically on the digital devices, the fusing of the CMYK inks to the silver. And what it means is you don't get 100% of it sticking down. So we can simulate this by using the ink trap. Now the ink trap only affects where the silver appears. So if I had, say, 80% cyan here and 80% over the silver, and I use the ink trap, this cyan does not get affected. It's only ever where the silver is, and only ever where the white is. So let's just drop that down now. It might be something like 80. Let's just go around with, say, something like that. So what we're doing now is you can see we're reducing the color. I can obviously reduce it right down. But you'll find it's, depending on what machine it is, like on an offset press, it might be somewhere around 60. Digital devices might be able to fuse it a bit more because of the temperature. But you've now got a simulation that looks much closer to the actual printed effect. So we've got that sparkle, we've got the right color, we've got as close as we can really get physically. And don't forget, we've got the paper color that we can also set as well. So down here, we've put in a default paper value in here that we've measured from just one paper type, but you know, you could put whatever paper color you want in there. So for example, if I start to go darker, you'll see that that affects color. So let's just leave it at somewhere around there. In fact, let's just reset that so I'm using the right version. Okay, so what we can also do is change the paper type, because it's not just about the silver and the CMYK interaction, it's also about how the ink is absorbed into the paper. So gloss coated, satin, matte, uncoated. Let's just switch this to matte coated and watch what happens to these colors here. So pay attention to the color when I switch it to uncoated. So you notice there's a change because you've got ink absorption. So we have an ink absorption slider. So first of all, we could, if we wanted to, change the gloss reflectivity to it, and you know, we've kept these on all the settings, so you can, if you want, just be really wacky. I'm just going to demonstrate that now by whacking that right up. You can see all of a sudden we've got gloss paper on there. So if you've got like a Chromolux high gloss paper, you could maybe be in your gloss coated, and it might be really glossy surface appearance with literally no ink absorption. And then we've got, you know, how color, silver and everything else works on a like a gloss cast coated or whatever they call it type material. Let me just go back to uncoated. So on the uncoated, we have ink absorption again. You can play around with these sliders to find the sweet spot to mimic the effect of ink absorption. So we give you all of these tools, all of these abilities to set your system up the way you want. And what you can do down here is you can save that as, you know, like an uncoated preset, so you can come back in and load up different materials. What you can also do with inside the actual color layer itself, let's go back to that silver layer. So now you can see we've got quite a lot of settings in here, all very easy to use. It's just about tailoring it. And once you've set this up, you can then save it as a default. So let's just say that mimics what I see in my hand printed off the press on my Fujifilm Revoria PC 1120 using silver toner and CMYK. So I've put my colour in there, I've got my opacity, my textures, my metalness, my roughness, all of that sort of stuff set up the way I want it. I've calculated my ink trap, maybe obviously let's just take into account there might be some inside there for the black and the magenta, although there's no black and magenta in this image so you won't see it, but let's just say we calculate all that in. What I can do now, first of all, I can save that as a preset. So let's say Revoria, oops, silver ABC printer. So I'm save that. What I can do now is I can send that setting to my designers. So for example, you might have 6 different terminals in your pre-press department. Well, you don't want to set this up manually. You can export it and copy it across to your next machine and import it and set up all your characteristics. Really easy. In fact, the best way to do it is actually use the full-on settings for this. Down here we have an export and import. So you can, if you've set up all these different settings from all your different machines, you know, your different colors and foils and varnishes and textures and everything else you put into your system that you've built, you can export that as a complete package and then import it into a clean machine, and it will set up that machine for you with everything. So you can basically port it across. Now, as far as the print is concerned, we've got that. Let's just now export that out. Save that down to the desktop. So I can then send that to a designer. So if I've got an agency that's working with the Visualis3R software as a printer, I can say, here, this is my silver toner. Use that when you're doing your visualizations. So you can communicate from the printer to the brand to the designers. You can all see and visualize your effects the way you want. Now, as a printer, you could also set this as a default. So let's just say I only have a Revoria press and I'm always going to use these settings because that's my silver. Well, I can save that as a default. So now that every time I load a file, it's always going to use that. And to test that out now, let's just open up a new file. Let's go back to the Revoria swatches. Open it up. Renders the file, brings it in, and it's set up for you. So we now have your color, your opacity sliders, your ink trapping settings all put inside there. Now let's just say I factory reset that. So if I'm a designer, maybe I've got the file. Let me just delete this one. So you can see there you can load up different settings. I'm just going to delete that one. Reset that again. Let's just pretend that this is brand new. I'm a designer. I've got my sample from my printer, my preset. I go to import, go down to the desktop, import that settings, and now I'm using the same settings as my printer. So the whole point of the Visualis3R software is not only to get you the best possible match to what you see in your hand, but like I said, bear in mind, the room that you're in affects the color. So, you know, you're never going to get a 100% perfect match, but it's as near as damn possible as you can get it. You can tailor the software to your color, your effects, your trapping. You can save presets. You can tailor the software to work in any way. And it's the same for all other modules, whether you're working with foils or varnishes, embossing, debossing, laminations, glitters. Everything is there that you can tailor it so you can match any metallic color. So if you're on an offset press and you're using a Panto metallic, you can match that Panto metallic visually in the software, save it as a preset, and then you can visualize any color. Same with brand colors. So the whole point of the software is to let you tailor the software to the way you want to work. So if you do have any questions on how all this works, or if you have any issues, or you want to discuss anything, or you have a suggestion for a feature, please drop us an email at hello@v3r.studio and we will be in touch. And like I said, this is only going to grow from here.